Should you be buying Broncos quarterback Russell Wilson during the 2023 offseason? All that more in this episode of Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Today, we are starting our AFC West preview, starting with the Denver Broncos, who, man, they've got a lot of interesting players on this team going into the 2023 season. But let's start with Russell Wilson. Kate, are you buying or selling Wilson going into the season?
I'm buying Russell Wilson, and I do like it. Let's be clear. It's not a buy based on the fact that he performed just so far above expectations in 2022. He had an abysmal season. Career like dead last in career ranks for like his completion rate, his touchdown interception ratio, passer rating. All of that was career low for him in 2022. Didn't have a lot of success. Nathaniel Hackett experiment was a disaster. Not to mention like Russell Wilson himself, like kind of a disaster. We heard some of those rumors that he was calling Seahawks audibles there in the huddle, like some kind of weird stuff coming out. But I do want to just like take a beat and go back to the perception of Russell Wilson before he headed up with the Denver Broncos. Because I do think, generally speaking, when you're looking at his value at quarterback 19, he kind of feels like the perfect QB2. Like this was his first year in a new offensive system. It was a disaster. But when you look at the arrival of Sean Payton, when you look at the like some of these offensive weapons, Jerry Jeudy, Javonte Williams, when healthy, Marvin Mims, who we were ridiculously high on coming out of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot of potential here in this offense. And I think that Sean Payton is going to be a difference maker. Now, 2018 to 2021, prior to that disastrous season, he had 50% of his games as a top 12 quarterback. So QB1 performances. When you look at that breakdown of how he finished in terms of QB1, QB2, and the percentage of games that he ranked there, he was actually really, really quite comparable to Kyler Murray, who's got he was QB5 last season. Like that's kind of where we're looking at him from a fantasy production standpoint. It can't get any worse than 2022. I'm just thinking when we consider the offensive personnel and the arrival of Sean Payton, how is he not a value at QB19?
This one I struggle with because you're right. I think there's a very good chance that he finishes better than QB like 19 for the next 2 or 3 years, right? But what's the upside here? Like, is there any chance he finishes as a top 12 quarterback? I think the answer is no, because
absolutely.
Okay, make the case.
We will disagree there.
Make the case. How does he do that this year?
I mean, hey, we're gonna need him to revert back to some of his previous skill set, right? Like career average touchdown percentage, 5.9%. He threw 3.3% of his passes went for touchdowns last year. Like I'm expecting some regression back to the mean here for Russell Wilson. And I think that is step one in getting him back to a top 12 quarterback performance. Obviously, I don't have expectations that he's going to finish as a top 5 quarterback, but to close out the season, 3 of his last 4 games played, he was a top 5 quarterback last year. Now, it didn't really help you much because he was either probably like in your redraft leagues, he was on waivers, or by this point, he finished right around QB 20 through the first, 12 games of the season. didn't help you out. So you probably found some other options if you were contending. So again, didn't really get your bang for your buck there for Russell Wilson, but he actually had kind of a strong finish to the season. And again, I keep going back to I love Jerry Jeudy. He was in contention for one of my dynasty buys, wide receiver 28, just 24 years old, had a really, really solid 22 campaign, despite bad quarterback play, despite being one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Like, again, if this is, if we're going to get like QB 20, 25-ish out of Russell Wilson in literally the most disastrous campaign that I feel like I can remember, and most disappointing campaign from a quarterback I can remember, we know we have a better sample size and a much bigger sample size of Russell Wilson actually being a productive quarterback than we do have him being a poor quarterback. I have to expect some regression back to the mean.
I think there is going to be some passing production back to the mean, as you suggested. My issue is the running. We saw early in his career. I mean, there was a couple seasons in there, Kate, where he was averaging, I don't know. Look at the 2014 season. He averaged 53 rushing yards per game. Do you know how many he averaged last year? 18.
Wasn't many.
18. Over the last 2 years, he's averaging 15 rushing yards per game. He turns 35 this season. That part of his game is just kind of gone, right? So now he's got to be a volume passer. And we've even seen guys like Kirk Cousins, who is a volume passer, struggle to be a top 10, top 12 quarterback, every single year. So I think the Broncos are going to want to run the crap out of the ball. I think they're going to want to make Russell Wilson very much a game manager. So if you're not having the volume and you're not having the rushing production anymore, I just don't see the upside. So it's not that I'm selling him, because you look at the quarterbacks kind of behind him and it's pretty gross. I mean, there are a couple guys that I like Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Desmond Ridder, but I would rather.
Do you think any of those guys have as high an upside as a passer, though? Because I think there's a pretty
but I don't know if it matters. If Desmond Ridder rushes for 30 yards a game, I'm not sure it's going to matter.
I think that's fair. Is there any do you put any stock in the fact that Russell Wilson had off-season knee surgery?
I think it's going to help him just move around in the pocket a little bit better and take fewer sacks. But he's going to be 35. Like, I just can't envision him being very mobile this year, right?
I don't think he necessarily needs to be overly mobile, because again, I look back and I think, his competency in most seasons, not last season, as a passer, can make up for some of that. I don't think we're going to get like 2017 rushing production, 2014 rushing production, but I like every single season, each of the last 4 seasons, at least 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 or more in 3 of the last 6 seasons. Like I think again, it's not a sexy pick, but again, he's QB 19. You don't need him to do much to perform as QB 19, but when you look at the players that he's throwing to, I think, when we project some of that efficiency to increase, it's really hard to see like a world where Russell Wilson doesn't provide some value there, especially as your QB2.
Just to clean this up a little bit, if you're in a super flex league, I can see how he has some value. If you're in a start 1 QB league, even if it's a 12 or 14 team league, I just don't see the appeal for Russell Wilson, just because there's just not a lot of upside there. So let's talk about somebody that we both maybe are agreeing on that you should sell this offseason next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your job and for your team faster and for free. All you have to do is post your job and then add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we are back here talking about the Denver Broncos. Kate, you and I disagreed on Russell Wilson, whether you should be buying or selling, but I've got a feeling that we're going to be in agreement here at for a certain wide receiver that you should sell. And who is that?
That is wide receiver Courtland Sutton, who, let's just be clear, it's not like you can get a ton for Courtland Sutton right now. He's being drafted in dynasty startups on average as wide receiver 50, which very interestingly, just one spot behind Denver Broncos wide receiver Marvin Mims, again, who we have been absurdly high on throughout this entire process. But the value for Courtland Sutton, like his ADP has literally never been lower in his entire career. But my goal here, is to literally just get him off my team. 64 receptions, 829 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns throughout the entire 2022 season. He had one fantastic breakout year. 1,100 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, made the Pro Bowl, incredibly exciting. But it was a very efficient year, which when you look at his career stats, right? Like that 22 yards per reception, huge anomaly for Courtland Sutton in terms of his production. They also have a lot of weapons, right? Like we mentioned, Jerry Jeudy, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, who, just continues to get the most glowing reviews. I don't think there's a spot here for Courtland Sutton to be productive and be a center point in this team. And I also Marcus, I would not be surprised. It feels very much to me like maybe not as extreme, but he feels like a Kenny Galladay type value drop that we're gonna see.
I would be shocked, if he's on this team next year. I would be shocked, and frankly, I'm kind of going to be shocked if he's on this team past the trade deadline. It feels very much like because they've had trade conversations. Like it's been very public about Courtland Sutton. It feels like they're going to bring him to training camp, wait for another team to suffer an injury or have somebody disappoint, and that's when they're going to move him. But I just don't see how on a team that's going to use 2 tight end sets and then has Jerry Jeudy traded up for Marvin Mims. They have Tim Patrick, who's universally loved. They have KJ Hamler, where Courtland Sutton fits on this team. And really quickly, you mentioned how you just want him off of his team. I'm going to bring up a trade that I made literally on Friday. I'm in it's a 14 player league where you only have 14 spots in your entire roster, salary cap league. He had a decent salary. I gave him away for nothing, like literally no asset coming back, just because he's one of those kind of roster blockers where I'm never going to feel comfortable starting him. I want to play some young guys and develop some young guys on my bench. I'm just moving on, right? And I know he's, going to be somebody that's going to probably be better than my bench guys, but there's just not a lot of upside here, Kate.
It's there's so much volatility here. There is so much, I just think there's so much disappointment here for what we expected from Courtland Sutton. And I just don't know. I don't see the upside in his trajectory at this point as an NFL wide receiver. I think, what we saw in 2022 is probably going to be some of the best we see from Courtland Sutton for the rest of his career.
Unless he gets traded to a situation that is just so much more advantageous for him. But I thought that would potentially be Baltimore, but that doesn't seem like the case after they signed Odell. They drafted Zay Flowers. Maybe it's one of these things where, Buffalo gets an injury to Gabe Davis early in the year, and they trade for somebody like Sutton to kind of take over that role. But outside of that, I don't see why he's going as wide receiver 50. That just feels crazy to me.
He's a big play guy, and I think people get wrapped up in that sort of big playability, but he doesn't have, a high catch rate, right? Average 56.8% catch rate over his entire career. Not a touchdown scorer to help. Sometimes with a lot of these big play guys, you can sort of justify maybe some of that lack of efficiency because the touchdown, usage is there. He's never scored more than 6 touchdowns in a season. He doesn't even give you that aspect of his game. He's not a volume guy. What does he bring to your fantasy roster? I don't think any. So yeah, this is going to be my opportunity. I will literally, I don't think anybody's specifically trading for Courtland Sutton right now, but he's a guy that I'm going to squeeze into a trade, maybe just tip the scales a little bit as a
filler almost, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
I'll just mention really quickly, the guy that I'm selling the most on this offense is Javonte Williams being drafted as RB15. I think that's absolutely insane. We've seen the same situation play out just last year with J.K. Dobbins, right? J.K. Dobbins coming back from a major injury, struggled all year to get healthy and didn't really give you anything. And now we're going into year 4 of J.K. Dobbins having no idea what's going on. I envision a similar thing for Javonte Williams, where year 2, he had the injury. Year 3, he's back on the field, but not quite the same. Maybe by year 4 is when he starts to take off. But if I can sell him as RB15 and, package him together to get, a running back that I trust more, like a Josh Jacobs or a Nick Chubb or Tony Pollard, that's what I'm doing instead.
It's hard because you see the upside with Javonte Williams, one of the most elusive running backs in the game of football right now, but it hasn't all come together. No. It's tough.
I think he's just going to be one of those guys where, and you're always hoping this year that it's going to happen. It's going to break out. And then maybe it does in 2024, but then you're talking about a running back on the final year of his contract to the Broncos give him a long-term deal. There's just so many unknowns about him this year and in the future that I would prefer to sell now while his value is still relatively high.
Yeah.
It's not great. All right, okay, let's talk about somebody that we're going to hold from this offense, maybe at the same position as Javonte Williams next. All right, we are wrapping up our preview of the Denver Broncos everydayers. We want to thank you for listening to the show. I want to let you know that Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday to do some of the Raiders, some Chiefs breakdowns. Kate, you and I back on Thursday to talk about the Chargers as we wrap up our preview series. But let's talk about those Broncos. Which player are you holding right now in Dynasty for the Denver Broncos?
It's got to be Samaje Perine for me. And
100%.
It's actually hard. So, Marcus, when I was researching for this show this morning, looking up his Dynasty ADP, I was a little surprised. I think he's actually being drafted a little further ahead than I would be comfortable. So, almost towing that sell line, RB43 in the most recent batch of Dynasty Startup. I definitely think the knowledge that Javonte Williams isn't fully healthy is influencing some of his startup ADP. Being drafted right around players like Khalil Herbert, Chase Brown, Damian Harris, who I would frankly prefer over Samaje
Herbert
Perine.
One is absurd, right? But we've been on the Khalil Herbert bandwagon all offseason.
Yes. And the thing is, he's the backup to Javonte Williams. We know he's not healthy, but when you look at the rest of the depth chart too, he's not just the only asset that I think could sort of function as the Broncos lead back while they ease Williams back into this offense. He continues to get more comfortable with his knee, but he's also a guy that I could picture, especially in a Sean Payton offense, just continued involvement as
that's the thing, right?
A guy with some receiving upside that maybe you can slot in as like an RB3, RB4 with some upside on any given week. I think Sean Payton's career with, the Saints, we saw a lot of passing production, but as Drew Brees started to age a little bit, the defense improved. This was a run team. This emphasis on the run was so apparent. Never ranked lower, in 17th in rush attempts, ranked top 5 in 3 of his 5 final seasons with the team in terms of rushing attempts, ranked as the number 1 overall rushing touchdown team producer in 3 of his 5 final seasons. That was the identity. I don't know I think we're probably going to see, a nice balance within this offense. But Sean Payton is more than capable of establishing the run. And I think that for, what you're looking at with Samaje Perine, over the last 2 seasons, he's had 4 games with 15 or more scrimmage touches, and he averaged 20 fantasy points per game. Like, I'll take that. I'll take that all day.
Look what happened last year when Joe Mixon was out of the lineup in Cincinnati. Samaje Perine came in and was very good. But once Joe Mixon got back, it wasn't like Joe Mixon was the only guy, right? It's because Samaje is so good in the passing game and he's reliable, right? He's going to block, he's going to catch. He kind of endears himself to a coaching staff. And Sean Payton is very much the guy where he wants players on the field that he can trust. And if Javonte hasn't improved as a pass protector, he's not being as dynamic as a receiver, you're going to see Samaje Perine on the field a lot, maybe a lot more than you expect. And in any game that he starts by himself, he's going to project as a really high-end RB2. So for a running back that's being drafted outside of the top 40, it's pretty good. But again, I'm probably not going out to buy him knowing that it's very, very much you might be only getting a 3-week starter and somebody who is splitting the load with Javonte Williams.
Yeah, and I think the sort of caveats here that you need to consider, like, how many running backs are you required to start in your dynasty league? How deep are your benches? If this is a RB heavy league, then I think that gives Samaje Perine a little bit more value because he probably will see a decent amount of targets, touches as the year carries on. I don't think he is going to just poof disappear.
And I think he has to be somebody that you value in PPR leagues. In a non-PPR league, I just don't think he really carries any value at all.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen of the day. Again, every day, Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday. Kate, you and I back on Thursday to talk about those new look Chargers with Kellen Moore running the offense there. Should be a lot of fun. I want to let you know that we are free and available on all platforms. Check out our show on YouTube. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Maljuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll see you guys next time.